we've kind of, awesome. So welcome to the Returning Your FY24 Grant Agreement presentation here for New Mexico Arts. It's kind of a lot of fun. Many of you who have worked with us over multiple years sort of know we are doing end of year. So many of you would have submitted your final reports probably within the last couple of months and certainly within the last few weeks. But another thing that we're already working on from the applications that were submitted in December is now moving to FY24 funding agreements and what returning those to New Mexico Arts looks like. So what do we mean when we talk about grant agreements? In the past, we actually referred to it as an art services contract. So the language is slightly different this year. This year, it's actually called a grant agreement, which in many ways, it's been functioning as a grant for many years. Much of what is in the agreement looks exactly the same as previous years. Just notice that we're calling it something different. So when you log in, it is the same thing. It's just now called an agreement instead of an art services contract. What do we mean by an agreement and an agreement packet? In the online system, and we'll give you a visual of this in the next couple of slides, we have uploaded the FY24 grant agreement, which includes several forms that all need to be completed for the packet to be considered complete. So the grant agreement is sort of 9 pages of legal language about the agreement. There are signature pages that your organization completes. There's a revised budget estimate, a schedule of program and services, an assurance of compliance form, and a statement of federal standing and funds. This is all in the same agreement. So each part of this needs to be completed. Other documents and forms that we've uploaded as part of the funding announcement include the award, a 1-page sheet that just explains what the award was for your organization this year, panel comments, hopefully with good positive or recommendations to sort of help improve future applications to New Mexico Arts. We'll talk a little bit about the New Mexico Substitute W-9 and an image release. So what does this mean? What does this look like? How do you access the FY24 agreement? When you log into your online account, which sort of is the repository for all things related to your organization since at least 2018. So if you've applied to us that long, there's quite a lot of historical information for your organization there. You will see information for the FY24 grant cycle, as well as historic information if you're interested as well. We have uploaded into your account, as I mentioned, the award, the panel comments, and the FY24 agreement. So hopefully you see those. Sometimes if we've forgotten to turn on the queue to the system to make it public facing, your agreement might be there, but you might not see it. So you can always let us know if for some reason you're not seeing your agreement, and we're happy to sort of walk you through that. Other forms that I mentioned, we have a page on our website that sort of helps support the grants program and what's online in the online system. These are your FY24 agreement forms. We have an agreement checklist. We're not asking you to return that this year, but we are, if you like checklists, we provided that for you. If you felt like you wanted to sort of see all the parts that are part of the grant agreement. Also in grantee documents and forms, we have revised budget estimate in case you need to revise your budget at any time during this process. An extra schedule of programs and services form. This is only if what we've supplied in the agreement doesn't seem like enough, even though we have allowed up to 5 activities, I think, in the current agreement, so that should be okay. The W-9 can also be found here, and we'll just sort of talk about what each of those things mean. You'll also notice we have not populated the information about FY24 invoices yet, as we have not completely closed out our FY23 funding year, actually. So many of you would have closed out your grants June 15th. There's a few grantees that close out their grants June 30th. So thus we still have last year's information because we're still working on closing out last year. We will be populating this, in the coming months with FY24 information. So what is the grant agreement? All right. So the grant agreement, as I mentioned, that's uploaded into your account they are PDF forms. We have made them fillable forms. So depending on your version of Acrobat, you will want to use Acrobat, not other software that helps interpret Acrobat, because we are seeing, especially with the budget forms, you really do need to have Acrobat open to sort of interact with these forms. There are signature fields. If you do have a digital software or digital signatures, you are welcome to use those forms that are populated and ready to accept a digital signature. But that would be for both a project director and an authorizing official having that capability. You're welcome to do that. You could also type in organizational information, and we'll go over each of the forms a little bit more in the next couple of slides. On the other side, we are completely okay. So say whatever's going on, we don't know what your software is like, how you're interacting with these forms. If you can't type into forms, if data isn't, you're unable to save depending on what's happening, or if you're not able to use Acrobat, you are welcome to download this contract and handwrite it in. So we will take, as long as the information's complete, it doesn't have to be typed in, it can be handwritten in, but there are several protocols depending on which way you approach returning the contract to us. One way of returning the contract, you might, again, have printed off this document, and the project director and authorizing official may actually handwrite it with ink, their signatures. Or as I mentioned, we populated fields for digital signatures. So it just depends on how you would like to approach this. Digital signature is different from what we call an electronic signature, which sort of is you just type in your name. An electronic signature is not the same as a digital signature. A digital signature requires a time-stamped verification that it's a secured signature. So I know sometimes you might hear from us, actually, this isn't a digital signature, we require that, or please obtain an original ink signature. In some cases, your project director may have complete capability to do a digital signature, but maybe your authorizing official is not able to do that. So what we ask is that you obtain the digital signature first. So the person who is able to do the digital signatures, that they sign in all designated parts of the contract where they need to sign, that they then print out a hard copy of the contract, and then they obtain that original wet ink signature from the authorizing official for the other parts. You will need, if your contract has any form of ink original signature, we actually need the original sent to New Mexico Arts. We need original signatures whenever that's part of the application. So we ask that you kind of follow these steps if that happens to be the case. If everybody's all original wet signatures, then we'll need the original with everybody's original wet signatures. So we can't take a contract that's a photocopy of original signatures. But your time-stamped digital signature will count as far as an electronic submission goes. So, as I mentioned, this is sort of a prototype of the agreement that you see online. There's a number for your agreement that was assigned. It has the funding cycle, New Mexico Arts, the year we're funding, 24, and then your unique identifier for your organization. Your organization name will be listed in the first paragraph of the contract. We have tried to make sure, and sometimes we may need to work with you, that this name is your legal name. So in theory, this should match your IRS letter for your organization, and this should match what's currently in the state vendor file for your organization. And we ask that you are also consistent with this whenever you are filling out organizational information later in the contract. Please look at how we've named your organization so that it's consistent throughout. Also on the first page of the agreement is going to be your funding amount. What were you awarded this year? This is going to be useful when you're filling in your budget for next or later in the agreement. Another critical thing, many of our grantees have a term date of May 31st. So often we will get a final signature on the grant from our secretary. It might be before July 1, but typically it's after. And the date that the secretary signs is sort of the first date of the contract. And then that term date is typically going to be May 31st, 2023. So think about those dates when you're thinking about the revised schedule of programs that we'll talk about later. That term date is really important. And then we also have kind of requirements for matching funds. So based on the award, the grant award amount, there are required match. Yes?
I'm on the conference call.
Oh. Great. Another one that I'd really like to bring your attention to, and it typically occurs in the first few pages of the contract.
Up till like 8.
Your final, I'm gonna mute this person, cool. Okay, an important item, and this is contractually obligated, is the dates of your final invoice and final reports. These are when those final reports are due to New Mexico Arts. They are assigned in the online system, but they're also part of this agreement that our agency signs, the project director signs, and the authorizing official signs. So it's critically important to probably write down these dates as you look through these agreements, so you kind of know the absolute final deadline for these items related to your activities. There is no reason, say your project ends in March of next year, there is no reason to wait to June 15th either. You are welcome to close out the grant when the project that you've submitted as far as this agreement is completed. But just know that that's a final deadline, but it's also what you are obligated to by signing the agreement. As I mentioned previously, on the first page of the contract is what we have as the legal name of your organization. This page has a lot of organizational information that's very critical for us. It's sort of how we know how to get a hold of you, but we also want to make sure that this information is matching everything that we have in the New Mexico Arts or the state vendor file for you. So again, organization name ideally needs to match what we've listed on page 1. We also want to collect information for both your project director and authorizing official. These two individuals are going to be the two signatories on this contract throughout the contract. So there's two individuals. The project director is our primary contact. Who are we calling if we have questions? Who has access to the online system? Typically, who's submitting your grant applications? You know, even though we know sometimes multiple people may be working on things, we always need that one primary contact. So this person listed here and who signs as the project director throughout the agreement is a really important contact for us. So having their title, their telephone, and most current email is vitally important to us, because it does happen. If we aren't notified of a change of project director, we're going to keep sending updates and even reminders of things to this person. And if that person has changed throughout the year, we have heard sometimes, oh, they don't work here anymore. So we're not getting any more New Mexico Arts updates or notices. And we're only as good in maintaining our system as being notified who these people are. So it's It's so critically important. This is your time. Maybe someone did change since you submitted the grant application, or even since you've closed out a previous year of funding. It's really, really important to get that person current for the FY24 agreement. And again, we're not intentionally trying not to reach out to you, but we don't know if you don't tell us. So we're gonna be excited to see who the folks are listed this year for your agreement. The next will also be true for the authorizing official. This is somebody from the governing body, and it's typically from the executive committee of the governing body. So board president, vice president, secretary, or treasurer. This must be different from the project director. So they are two different people. One is the paid staff person typically, and the other is from the board of directors. And it's nice to have two people listed on the contract because again, maybe a project director has an emergency or is out of pocket. The next person we might call would be the authorizing official. So these two people that you identify for your agreement this year are critically important to our efforts to keep you up to date. And these are the two people that are going to sign in all the designated areas. Where a project director is designated, that person will sign all of those sections, and authorizing official will also sign designated sections through multiple pages. Something of note as well, depending on if you're using a fiscal agent, this authorizing official is from the board of directors of the fiscal agent. And if you are a government institution, it may be a little bit different, even from some of our nonprofit grant agreements, in that for a government institution, it just needs to be somebody who's able to legally obligate the organization. So it may look a little bit differently depending on the type of organization that you are. Another recommendation I have that's just really good nonprofit practice. I know we're a small community, and actually many of our nonprofits are family affairs. So you might have even multiple members of the same family working for a nonprofit, particularly as they were founded and then got bigger. I would, and this year, I really want to clarify this. The project director and authorizing official should have no relation to one another. Again, this is a checks and balances, just kind of good nonprofit practice. So again, in likelihood, it's exciting that many people work for the same nonprofits as family members. We just want to make sure that different individuals that are not members of the same family are listed on the grant agreements. Right. So that was kind of going over the signature pages and who those people are, who the project director and authorizing official are. We have several exhibits. These are still part of the agreement packet, and without these, the agreement is not considered complete by New Mexico Arts. So please don't leave these pages blank. We have as exhibit 1, a schedule of programs and services. This will actually look very similar to what you maybe gave us as part of your funding application this year. But realizing now, this schedule is what you are legally obligating your organization to do. But it also reflects what the funding award ended up really being, and also the current reality of your organization. So we know December was sort of aspirational, pie in the sky. If I get full funding, these are the things I'm going to do. And this is now, okay, this is the funding award I did get from New Mexico Arts. And in the last 6 months, maybe 2 of the artists we were going to present aren't going to be able to do some of those activities we had originally said in our grant application. But this is going to be kind of the current reality. What does your season or of programs look like kind of going into this fiscal year? And it's okay if it's not everything you said, you know, in that grant application. We understand that was, again, aspirational and, you know, really exciting. And now it's, okay, this is our funding award. This is what our season looks like. Maggie has some awesome points too that she always makes with folks. Do you mind sharing some of those? she might not. Okay. So something Maggie is really, really incredible about with the.
I'm sorry, I was slow on the uptick of unmuting myself.
All right.
I guess maybe I'm thinking what you're referring to is that, give yourself a cushion on the front end and the back end of your schedule of programs and services. I know that sometimes people get confused regarding the start date because it doesn't make reference to the Secretary of Department of Cultural Affairs signature indicating the start date. It's printed that the start date is July 1st, and that might be a little confusing. So what my suggestions are is to give yourself a really good cushion, because by the time your contract comes in, and believe me, they flood our organization all at the same time. So we're dealing with upward of 100 contracts at a time, and then they get passed on to another department and yet another. And it takes time to get this contract processed all the way through to the secretary's start date signature. So what I suggest to people is that they give a beautiful cushion of a couple months before their first listed program. And I know there's an urge for people to list every single thing they're going to do. That is not to your benefit. What we suggest is that you minimize it to some realistic. I mean, we're giving you somewhere between $4,000 and $7,000. Minimize and realistic programs that are funded by that $7,000. And then the same being on the back end. So if you have a whole season of something that you're doing, give yourself a break and don't push yourself right up against that deadline of being finished with your programming by May 31st, to be getting that final invoice in by June 15th. If you have some winter programs or very, late fall programs, try to, fit your funded programming within that parameter. The other thing that I've been telling my grantees, because it does get a little complicated, is in your budget, spend all your money on one or two things. Typically, and probably the most used category, is contracted artistic services, so that you're paying the artists. Another typical heavy use of a line item of what to spend your money on is marketing and PR. Some people throw all their money in marketing and PR. Some people throw all their money in, just one category. So those are my handy dandy, take it easy on yourself suggestions. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Maggie. Now, I know that, those of you who get to work with Maggie, she shares those tips, but I think it's nice for the whole group. And here's something else to think about when you think about this agreement. The agreement is sort of its own world now. So even if you submitted things in your application, those were aspirational. This is, again, more the reality moving forward. And even we know there can be revisions along the way as the contract year moves forward. Something I'd like to really highlight as well, Exhibit 1, the schedule of programs and services. So you see on this document that we've listed up to 5 things you could list. Here's something I just want you to consider as you're moving through this agreement. So Exhibit 1, as I mentioned, say you list 5 activities on Exhibit 1. When you come to Exhibit 2, this should be the reflection of those 5 activities only that you list on Exhibit 1. So the schedule and the budget are completely related to each other. So it's not going to be, 2 activities on your schedule, and then I'm going to put my whole season on the budget. We are looking to see if there's 5 concerts on Exhibit 1, then it's the income and expenses for 5 concerts on Exhibit 2, this revised budget estimate. Again, as I mentioned on the schedule, this reflects your actual funding amount that was highlighted on page 1. This form does add up the figures for you. We ask in the, so if you have it in income, have it in expenses, in theory, these should zero out because right now this is a budget. This is projected. Yes, Maggie.
Yeah, the other thing I want to add, and I know I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but some of my very small, like the community arts development with a very small budget annually, because of a cash flow issue, they can sometimes use invoice 1, invoice 2, and the final invoice. Always keep in mind these original amounts that Anna's mentioning in the line items for expenses, because they really need to line up from one invoice to another. For example, if you're going to put all your money in artistic contracted fees and services, let's just, for the sake of a round number, you're going to put all $5,000 in that category. But you invoice us for number 1 and you put $2,500 and we pay you $2,500. Just know that your final invoice will also need to be $2,500 in that same category. Tendency for some of our organizations is to put the money in as many categories as you spent it. But really, all we're looking for are the numbers on this particular document. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, you can make it easier on yourself. I mean, other great tips. So say for the sake of, and I think Maggie gave us a good example of, say the New Mexico art amount is $5,000. And then again, in your expenses, you've spent it on artistic contracted fees. Or say maybe you want to split it across 2. Make it easier on yourself too, like 2,500 here, 2,500 here instead of 1,017. Like you can round up to just make it make sense and make it easier for your record keeping as well. It just, sometimes those kinds of things can be simpler as you're putting this together. I know in kind, is another one of those things where we're asking for in-kind income, in-kind expenses. When we ask for in-kind income, we're saying, what is this? Who maybe gave some of this support? So what were they, individuals? They might be private support. Was it a state and local government maybe, let you use their center for no rent? You might pick what the support is up top, who it came from. Often it will be private. Sometimes it might be corporate. Sometimes it might be your local governments as examples. And down below, so as it is above, in the in-kind expenses, what was it that was donated to you? Did they donate rent and mortgage? So did that government entity above, your local city government, give you $500 in rent, and then down below it would be $500 in rent, but up above it would be local government support for $500. Maggie?
Another question that I field often is, okay, what if one of your board members is maintaining your website or designing your website? I get asked frequently, can we put board of directors volunteer hours into the in-kind column? And it depends. If these are considered regular board duties, then no, you can't use that as really as in kind. But if they own a printing company and they've allowed the printing company to give you all your programs that they've printed gratis, then you can put that in the in-kind. And the way that you would put that in your income column would be other private support, or they may want to list it as, as a company, as the corporate support. And then down below, you would put the whole amount in materials and supplies. I hope that's clear. Thank you.
Yeah, so, and sorry, I kind of jumped to in-kind because I think that one does trip a lot of people up. The first column really is what we call cash income. So this is like the real money for the project. So the 5 events we talked about in your schedule in Exhibit 1, it's really the real, what you perceive income for the project, and then the real perceived expenses for the project. And again, right now, because it's an estimate, they could zero each other out and should. We understand that when a project's complete at the end of the year, you're actually going to give us the real numbers for those 5 concerts. And that may, you might have more income than expenses in theory, or you might have a loss. And again, we would ask for an explanation in those regards. So the first column is money that you're projecting earning for the project, money you're projecting spending on the project. The second column is how our grant comes into the mix, how much the award was, how you're designating that funding to help, where our funds will be used. And it's fine if it's a couple of line items, and it's absolutely fine if it's just one line item, as Maggie suggested. And then the in-kind, this is, you weren't paid for it, but it does have a monetary value, donations of time, services, goods, etc., to help present those 5 concerts. So they're all part of the same story. The last couple pages are just other forms that, as I mentioned earlier in the signature page, we have those designated project director and authorizing official. So those individuals were designated on that signature page. They have several other areas of the grant agreement that they need to sign, which includes this assurance of compliance form. So the same project director and the same authorizing official are signing here. These are also either digital signatures or, again, written ink, original wet signatures, depending on what works for your organization as far as securing those signatures. We will look when these agreements come into our office that the same person designated as such, so the same project director or same authorizing official is the same person signing throughout, and that all the required signatures are there. If we skip a signature, we will reach back out to you and say, an assurance compliance form is missing the authorizing official's signature, et cetera, or these other forms, Exhibit 1 and 2. We need a schedule and a budget. If those pages are left blank, the agreement is considered incomplete. If we don't have everybody's required signatures, the agreement is considered incomplete. The final exhibit, so we have 4 exhibits as part of this agreement, is the statement of federal funds. This form is only signed by the authorizing official. So you will note the authorizing official is signing a signature page, an assurance compliance page, and a statement of federal funds. So I know many of you are sort of wrangling to get this person to sign this agreement. So making sure that you've secured their signature in all the areas they need to sign. You will notice there's a question, and actually in this year's agreement, it's gone up to $750,000. You select one of these 2 options. So it's an either or, 1 or 2. You receive no more than an amount, or you receive that amount and more of combined federal funding. Most nonprofits on this call probably are going to fall into the number 1 category, but you're going to have to look at your organization, income and expenses to sort of see which one applies to you. I'm guessing some of our folks who represent some of our local colleges, government entities, number 2 might be the option that they select. Something to note, and we have tested it, but please let us know. Again, it's an either or. I'm checking box number 1 or I'm checking box number 2. If for some reason you check both boxes, and hopefully you were able to do this, and in testing, it seemed to work out. But again, we're happy to assist. Uncheck the one that doesn't apply to you, because both answers is not the answer. So again, is it box number 1 or box number 2? Please check the correct one. And again, have that authorizing official. Please note that this individual is very busy with our signature on this agreement. They're actually signing both sections. So 1, they're agreeing to the information about federal funding and the amount that the organization receives, but they're also certifying that the organization is in good standing with the federal government. So we ask for signatures in both places because they're agreeing to 2 different parts of this form. So it's really important. And again, we'll always be looking, did the same person sign throughout? Did they sign in all the designated areas? Okay, how do we get them back? How do you return these documents to us? As I mentioned before, only in the case of digital signatures, you are welcome to attach the agreement as long as all those exhibits, so again, that signature page and exhibits 1 through 4 of the agreement have to be absolutely complete. Yes, Maggie. Oh, you're muted. You're still muted.
Sorry about that, folks. I just wanted to mention that in the chat thread, I have included an Adobe digital signature instruction page, which will make it really, really clear, which also includes a link to a YouTube video that explains it in even more depth. So there you go. Thanks.
Thank you, Maggie. And yes, so we wanted to give you this option as hopefully a service, and hopefully it's helpful. For some reason, the IT universe on your side does not have the most up-to-date version of Acrobat. As I mentioned, I would suggest, if you're getting down a rabbit hole that it's taking, 20 and 30 minutes to get a digital signature, at a certain point, it's perfectly fine just to download it and handwrite it all in. So we don't want you to also, it's great if it works out, and that's wonderful, and we will accept them this way. And on the other side, if you're like, the cost benefit of trying to figure this out, I can just download it and also mail it in as well. So that's one way to return the agreement. And many of you might just know, if you emailed me a document that has handwritten signatures on it, I will send an email back that says I cannot accept a photocopy or a scanned version of a document with original signatures. So automatically, it's not disqualified, but you'll get a message from us that says, I'm sorry, we're not able to accept this application or this agreement in this format. So just think about that. If you're thinking, I need to return this contract to New Mexico Arts, what are the signatures that I have contained in it determines the way that you send it back to us. So only if your authorizing official and project director and every signature in the agreement is a digital time-stamped agreement, that would be the choice to go ahead and email it to us. And Maggie?
Yeah, another thing that we've wrangled with on the grantees end of things is that sometimes these, this isn't a guarantee, but sometimes when it's the fillable forms aren't accepting your information, what I suggest to people is that they download the whole contract to their desktop, open Adobe Acrobat, and then choose the open file and open your contract from the desktop. Because sometimes when you open these contracts, if you aren't opening them within Adobe Acrobat, strange things happen. That's just it. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you, Maggie. No, actually all great tips. Okay. All right. So mail a hard copy. So as I mentioned, is it this way or is it this way? Is it door number 1, door number 2? And we're happy with however the agreement comes back to us. So door number one was awesome. If every signature was a digital timestamp signature, that would be the way to do it. And your agreement is completely complete. So all the forms are, all your information's there, your budget and schedule are completed, and all the other forms are completed. That's the way to send it. That's one way to send it. If you do have original ink signatures, so somebody in the mix needs to physically sign the contract or the agreement, and they sign in ink, then you'll want to put that combination of signatures. So this might be both your project director and your authorizing official. Maybe the whole thing's handwritten. Maybe you have typed in organizational information, but the signatures, somebody signed in ink or both parties signed in ink. We want the document that includes that original ink signature to be mailed to us in one envelope. And this is our mailing address. So again, you have door number one, door number two, depending on the situation in your agreement. As I mentioned previously on the grantee documents and form page, we do have a checklist if you are lovers of checklists to see all the parts that should be included in this document. We do not, in years past, we've had this included in the actual agreement packet. I'm just trying to have less pages included in the agreement packet, but we did want to have it here for you for reference. And we'll talk about what we mean by this W-9 in just a moment too, because this is not an all things for all people document, but it is a useful document if certain situations apply to your organization. And again, just note, you're either going to be emailing or mailing this complete packet to us. We also have established a deadline for these. So no later than September 1st of 2023. Now that does have the caveat, do not return something, say September 1st, if you had programming in July or August. We need that agreement much, much sooner, and actually as soon as possible if you have a July or August program. And I think Maggie actually did outline, give yourself, if you have a lot of programming throughout the year, give yourself a buffer. Like, don't pick the July 5th event, because that's frenetic for you to secure the signatures and fill in the agreement. And it's frenetic for us to make sure we even get the agreement signed in time. Like, we would probably, this juncture, if you had a July 5th event, I'm not sure we would have the time to get it signed to ensure that event would be covered. So giving yourself a little bit more buffer is super helpful, particularly if you have a year of programming, throughout the year. But September 1st is the absolute latest that we want to see agreements in here. And again, September 1st would be with the caveat that you're probably presenting programming, in late September or October at the soonest. So just think about when your first activity that you'll be using New Mexico Arts funding for is going to happen, to determine when you'd like to return the agreement. Because typically, if it's within the same week of the activity, I almost can guarantee that I can't get it signed by all the parties here within our department that it goes through once it comes into our office. Okay, other documents. So you will note on the checklist that we talked about if it was necessary. And if you are a new grantee to us, this is necessary. If you have not been funded by New Mexico Arts before, we need to establish you in the state vendor file. So as part of your new agreements with us, you would need to be submitting this W-9. And we did send that link as part of the funding notification so you can get this. There is also a great example document that sort of tells you, these are what each of these sections mean in the W-9. And it is a very detail-oriented form. It actually does, our fiscal people are incredibly strict, so they will kick it back if things are not listed in the correct line item of this document. There's multiple fiscal people that look at it within our own department as well as the Department of Finance. So they are non-negotiable. If there's an error in this, and trust us, we're used to helping people, like we may be filling it in 2 and 3 times over sometimes. But hopefully this cheat sheet gives you an idea to be the most successful you can be in submitting this form. We do ask, again, that it's the legal name of your organization is presented here. You would also submit this if you moved. And we know organizations do change address. We have to change it in the state vendor file so that we can make sure. Right now, we're proceeding with many grantees who've been funded through several years. If you haven't had a change of address or other banking detail, we've been paying you the same way, for multiple years. We don't know, again, sort of as I mentioned before, if we don't know you've changed address or you've closed your bank, we're still mailing that check and we're still directing funds to the bank that we have the details for in the state system, which, as you can imagine, can actually present quite a bit of difficulty, particularly in the case of a closed bank account, because the state is going to still send the funds to the account we have on file. And then it does become quite a process if those funds get kicked back, which, we want you to have your funds and be successful getting your funding. So having the most up-to-date information for your organization in the state vendor file is critical. And we won't know unless you tell us. In some cases, some of our grantees have checks mailed to the address that's in the state vendor file. Again, this one, if you've moved, the check's still going to your old address. So that'll be something to look out for. Again, if you think you have moved or know you're moving as we move forward with the FY24 agreements, we just want to make sure we're up to date there. If you do select a direct deposit option, you do submit a voided check as part of that so that the state system knows your banking details, where they're directing this funding to. Something else of note with W-9s, the state likes to do kind of spot checks with people who select direct deposit, and so say you submit a new W-9 to us, say you select you'd like direct deposit, or as this form calls it, ACH, you might get a very strange phone call from the state from a number you don't recognize that says, we want to verify your account, so somebody you don't know, and it probably seems super suspicious, might be calling you to verify your details. If they are not able to reach you, and sometimes we ignore that phone call because we're like, I don't recognize this number, very strange number, or who is this person asking for my bank details? Typically from the Department of Finance, so they're not from New Mexico Arts. They're calling to do this spot check verification. If they can't verify, they're going to default to mailing you a check. So it's not even that people ignored your request for direct deposit. It just may have been somewhere in their process they couldn't verify who you are or your details, so they defaulted to a check. So that's, W-9, if you moved, if you're closing a bank account, if you're trying to establish direct deposit, and if you're a new grantee to us. So you are not in the state vendor file. Yes, Maggie?
I'm sorry to backtrack a little bit, but I wanted to, I'm putting all kinds of stuff in the chat thread. And so what I did was I just included very specific instructions for any project director changes in the chat box. It's a nice little PDF document. Thank you.
Thank you. And okay, I was going to say, there's another question about the substitute W-9. So it is the New Mexico Arts grantee documents and forms page of our website. So that link is sort of here at the bottom of this slide where you can get that form. And again, not everybody's going to need this. So don't feel like you have to complete this if everything is true and the same for your organization as it has been, for the last few years. But if some of these situations are true for your organization, then we will want to get that W-9 as soon as possible. Okay. More information about what you see in the online grant system. We mentioned a document called Award. Again, this is just for your records. We are required to supply this to you as part of your funding notification. And basically, it sort of tells you information about the year that we were funded by the National Endowment for the Arts as part of our partnership agreement. It will have your organization name, your UEI number. It will also let you know our grants are a mix of both state general fund and National Endowment for the Arts funds. We are required to notify you if your grant award contains federal funds for the award, and just note that you would not use federal funds as a match for other federal funds. So that's a good thing to just note when you are accepting your grant this year. Just see, are some of my funds federal funds? We also supplied, visually it'll look similar to this. These are for reference only, your panel comments from this year, from the individuals that reviewed the grants this year, and their comments in each of the areas that the applications were considered: artistic quality, community support, and administrative ability. This is not in the online system, but it is in the grantees of documents and forms. And I know that Sue Snaringer and I earlier this year sort of sent out a request for images of programming. We will be doing that again in FY24, just so we can kind of compile and talk about the kinds of programming New Mexico Arts is supporting as part of our marketing and educational efforts. But we certainly always, as an arts organization, want to make sure we have permission to use these images and this content that you're creating. And we're delighted and grateful when you supply us with this. And just know, if you do, depending on how you might send something to us, we're not going to be returning these items to you. But again, we just want to make sure we're crediting the appropriate people. The photographers, yes, Maggie.
Oh, I didn't mean to interrupt. We have just a simple question in the chat box. If our main address is a PO box, is that okay?
Are you already funded by us? We can check too. We would want to just check which one you might have selected as part of the if you've been funded by us, we have purchase orders with you, and that should be okay. But if you're a newer, there had been some issues sometimes with PO boxes with security situations, and especially in light of even some of the stuff we've gone in with federal funding and rescue funds and things like that. You should be okay, but we can also—
Yeah, and also the UEI number. A lot of people got a hitch in their get along because they only had a PO box, so they needed a physical address to secure the UEI number. That's another thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So, here, actually, something that can be informative to you as returning grantees, newer ones, we can guide you through the process. As I mentioned, this online system sort of has the history of you, from fiscal year 18. In fiscal year 23, if you did get funding from us, uploaded in your documents is a copy of the State of New Mexico purchase order. So for those of you funded in FY23, look at that purchase order, because that is actually how you are listed in the state vendor file. So if for some reason you're like, oh, this is crazy wrong, we would want to fix that, going forward in FY24. So it's a record for you. We'll do that again in FY24. Just again, make sure your organizational information looks like it's matching the purchase order, because even just understanding with information in the state vendor file, that's also how they recognize how to pay you. So as I mentioned, they're really using the address that's in the system. And ideally, we have some really eagle-eyed finance people here within our own division. They're looking at your signature page of your contract with your organization name and your address, and they're cross-checking that with the state vendor file to see, is this address this organization is listing matching how we have them established in the state vendor file? So it's worth thinking about. We might point out if we see differences like that, because again, we want to make sure we have the most current, absolute current information for your organization. Yes, Maggie?
I would also add that sometimes what happens is people use acronyms for their organizations. What is so important when you work with the state and you're contracted with the state is consistency. Always. I mean, if your name is We Do Art Inc., always list it as the full name, We Do Art Inc. If your address is 123 Main Street and you write out street, do it that way every time. So this is why I tell some of our first-time grantees what they need to print out on the front end of this annual contract. Print out your budget so you know where you put the money and that it will be consistent throughout until the final invoice. Print out what you include with your completed contract regarding your programming so that you can only mention those programmings or so you can easily reference if anything changed. Also, I recommend to the smaller organizations just to help them know what we want you to keep track of throughout the fiscal contract, print out the final invoice. Because then, and what you do is you make a selection, I think it's create a document. You open up the final, it's a blank. You open up your final invoice once Anna has notified you that your follow-ups, that's what we call invoices here, once your follow-ups have been released, and that's a little while after we get your contract back. And you can go in there and print out that hard copy document because we want you to keep track of a lot of different things for the final invoice. Thank you.
Thanks, Maggie. Yes, and many of you who probably have worked with me, especially in the NMR or other funding, that's the first thing I might say to you when we're doing technical support for closing out your grant. I might say, let's reestablish ourselves, go back to your signed agreement in the system and open up that document as your point of reference, because those events, as we mentioned, the events that you list on Exhibit 1, schedule, budget, on Exhibit 2, budget estimate, those are sort of a guidepost for your year. We understand, and there are, as Maggie mentioned, questions in the final report. You know, did it happen as it was planned? So did the 5 things you listed on Exhibit 1 happen? And if they did, then you would say happened as planned. These were the 5 things we did this program year. This was how, this is how much it costs. This is the program data for the 5 things on that schedule. Or if it didn't happen, we ended up doing 3 out of 5 of the things on the program activities. This is why. Here's some adjusted figures. Our budget's a little bit less than the original budget because of those things. But it is it's there as a tool for us. I, as a staff person, I'm going to open up that contract when I'm doing the final report to see what's listed in this final report is relating back to this agreement we have on file. If there are differences, the grantee has explained those differences and clarified that, and that's fine. We know things change, even submitting something now, things might look a little different in December or 6 months later. So we know there can be some adjustments, but it's actually, this agreement is a guidepost for all of us. It helps staff know, yes, the grantee did what they legally contracted to do. And if there's some differences, it's explained in a final report really nicely, but it can be really helpful, and it will almost always be the first thing I will say to you as you're getting ready to do a final report, or even a first invoice, as Maggie mentioned. What was it that you have agreed to do that's outlined in this agreement, and we're drawing down funds according to what we outlined in the agreement? Okay, and here's the question: what happens next? So, as you know, and thank you all for hanging in there with us, none of it is a fast process. You know, from when you submit an application in December, and now we're having a conversation in June, recommended funding and notifications. What happens now? As I mentioned before, New Mexico Arts is still actually closing out our FY23 grants as we speak, because our fiscal year ends on June 30th. But we're already in the zone of July 1 is the start of fiscal year 24, of which these agreements are part of that fiscal year. So what's going to happen? As I mentioned, you're going to return your contract to us depending on what kind of signatures do I have. So whenever you're thinking about it, are my forms complete? What kinds of signatures do I have? And then your manner in which you return that to us. Is it mailed or is it emailed? We will then sort of move it through for processing in the division. Each staff person will get the agreements of grantees that they work with, and they're going to review these forms pretty carefully. They're going to make sure the signatures are the appropriate people, that they've signed throughout, that all your forms are complete. You have a schedule of activities that's clear, and that schedule of activities probably would not be starting July 1. As we mentioned, you know, you might be safer end of July, August at this point. And that your activities don't include things of like June of 2024 or August of 2024. Like if you're way out of the bounds of our contract period, staff will point that out to you.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Maggie.
I would also say that a lot of people email or call us to say, did you get my contract? Is everything okay with our contract? Believe me, if there's something wrong with your contract, we will get in touch with you because we will help you make corrections because we need it all to be precise and buttoned up. So don't fret. Thank you.
Yeah, they're not shy. It's very helpful. Team of people that we want to make sure you're successful, and that we're also, when we're submitting them for signature through the department, they go through our legal counsel and through our chief financial officer and then onto our secretary. So our legal counsel is actually really excellent at noting, hey, is this within the contract period, or you know, those kinds of things. So we try and preempt as much of that work as possible so that the information that starts moving forward for signature is, as Maggie said, as buttoned up as possible, so that there are no questions and that the agreements move through smoothly. So if everything's great, perfect grant agreement, all the signatures are there, we proceed with acquiring signatures both through New Mexico Arts, our executive director signs, and through the Department of Cultural Affairs, and then we move on to request the purchase order. Now, this is a long process. So this is also something to note. Just because a grant agreement has been returned to us does not mean in the next 2 weeks you're going to have a purchase order designated. So as Maggie said, you don't necessarily have to reach out and say, I haven't heard about funding yet, particularly within, you know, a few weeks, because you won't have heard about funding yet. Mm-hmm. This can actually be from signature. So the signature date that the secretary signs is your effective date. But that can still be a few month process from when a purchase order is actually designated in the system. And things that affect purchase orders can be things like, particularly if you've had a change of address, banking, those kinds of things, a purchase order most certainly won't be created until those adjustments have been made as well. So When that purchase order is approved, we will upload your fully executed agreement. So you will see the agreement and you will see the date that Secretary Deborah Garcia y Griego signed your agreement, which is your effective date. And you will be assigned your FY24 invoices, or as the online system refers to them, as follow-ups. And at that point, then you may be able to request funds for reimbursement. Please note that thing on the bottom, and I know it, we are government, so bear in mind, this can up to 12 weeks from when we get the grant agreement here, have determined, and when that grant agreement is correct. So it's not even from the date we get it, because if we have to go back and forth to get corrections from you, it really begins the process only from when we have sent it on for signature do we really start this process of moving towards the purchase order.
Right.
Yes, Maggie.
Which I can further emphasize, that cushion, that front end time cushion. Don't put activities that you're doing on August 30th if you've only just submitted your contract on August 1st. Give yourself a very nice cushion. I really suggest to people you really select funded activities that are within the middle of the contract time span. Thank you.
Yeah, because we've definitely been in a situation, and it happened last year, where, you know, some organizations, and admittedly, a July program or an August program may be the only program that we are well and truly funding. And we will do everything we can. I mean, this is where it becomes dependent on both of us. Say you absolutely only have a July program. I mean, we're already tied. It's June 26th now. Say the July program is absolutely the only thing funding. We really would want to make sure we have the agreement this week to even hope to get that signature in place for the July activity. And the same thing, I mentioned that September 1st deadline. It almost is not possible for us to accept an agreement and then a week later have a fully executed contract. Like, again, as I mentioned, it goes through many parties in our department, all in different divisions of our department. So, you know, we will flag things to try and ensure that the secretary's signature is in time for those events. But again, last year we did have somebody send something that their event started the same week that they sent the agreement. And that just, we ended up getting it signed maybe halfway through the project. Just, again, the reality of bureaucracy, we're not fast, you know that, having submitted your applications in December and being notified of funding in June. And it's just a kind of another part of that. You know, we love funding you, but we're not as fast and nimble as, say, other kinds of funding agencies might be, by virtue of we're a government agency. All right. Yes, Maggie.
There's a good question in the thread from William Johnston. Here's his question. If you do have an event in July, is the cushion suggested because the funds won't be distributed in time? And so this is kind of a twofold question.
I can answer that. So it's not so much, so, and actually, sorry that this wasn't clarified earlier in the presentation, but it is a good question. Our funding is reimbursement based. So you sort of pay for the activity and then later submit the follow-up or invoice, as we call them, after the activity is completed. So it's not so much, the purchase order is a big part of, we can't disperse funds until a purchase order is in place, but we can't reimburse activities before the date the secretary signs either. So we want to make sure that Secretary Garcia y Griego's signature, say you have a September 15th event, that I have a Secretary Garcia y Griego signature that maybe is July 31st. We know your September event can be funded if Deborah signs July 31st. Again, we mentioned the purchase order could take 12 weeks from when we receive it. So you might be getting a notice from me, maybe it is in September or October when you get the purchase order. So you might have an effective date from when the secretary signed, but I can't assign the invoices or follow-ups until I have a purchase order. But say I give you, assign those follow-ups in September or October, and you see the secretary's signature is July 31st, you can then come in and say, I'd like to, my first invoice or follow-up is related to the September 15th event. You can't pre-ask either. So because they're reimbursement, you would not send in an invoice before the event. So we would also make sure that it is, we held this concert on this day. And some people, and Maggie mentioned it with cash flow, say your event was August 10th and you have a purchase order and the secretary's signature is before August 10th and it's August 12th and we have a purchase order, you could invoice us fairly quickly for something that just happened, to help cushion that cash flow thing. But it is a longer play as far as getting this purchase order. And actually, I know in past years, there's been worry because of delay of when the actual purchase order versus the secretary's signature. It is always the secretary's signature that's your effective date. We just won't enable you necessarily to be able to draw down funds until the purchase order is in place. And what the purchase order is it's those funds for your individual grant have been encumbered. So that money tied to that vendor encumbered in the state system. And until that happens, there's nothing for us to pay on. So if you were to send us an invoice, we wouldn't have something established that has funds tied to it at that time. But we're always happy at any point in this process to help you kind of as you move through the fiscal year. But look out for that notice because that's an important moment of here's your contract, look at the secretary's signature, and I have a purchase order. I can start drawing down funds now.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. So can you, if you have like decent cash flow, that's not a problem. You can have an event prior to the signing by the secretary that would still, so it's only the moment the secretary signs it, that's when all your programming can start from.
Yes.
That is funded by that grant period.
Yes. So sometimes you may, and this is where that giving yourself some cushion, so not sending it in the week before an event or even 2 weeks before an event, really. If you have multiple activities, sometimes we'll have a agreement come in that maybe has something too early and the secretary didn't sign it for the earliest activity because of maybe the timing of when it came in. But if you had 3 or 4 other events, we would just move forward with supporting those activities. So you would just have to be conscious of that when you get the notification of funding. If anybody's on the cusp of that, when you get that notification of funding from me, open that contract or agreement, see when her signature date is, look at your schedule of programming and pick the next program that falls within her signature date.
Okay,
yes,
great.
Maggie?
And then never mention that activity ever again, because it will put a hitch again. It'll put a hitch in the get along. If you mention that in an invoice, in the final invoice, it'll go, whoa, we'll tag it and go, that's before the secretary's signature date, which indicates the start date. So never mention it again. Thank you.
Should I, so would it be wise to, get the contracts and all in as quickly as possible and then see if it gets signed before our first event and then amend it after in like our invoices and things like that, or our final report to amend it so that it reflects programming only after the secretary's signature. But
Exactly right.
But there's a
Exactly
chance you
right.
might sign it before our first event.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I just tell people, just don't even list a July event because you are riding a fine line. And depending on the timing of the state government and all its activities is not a good bet.
Okay.
So I just say stay away from July. And if you have plenty going on in the winter, stay away from August too, depending on when you get your contract back to us, of course. Good question. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, and we understand, like, there are some organizations that literally their July event is it. Like, maybe the absolute only thing that we're funding, and we'll do just everything we absolutely can to, get that signed. In years past, like, we funded some of the markets, they happen at the exact same time every year, or some of our performing arts organizations that the summer season is their thing. But even then, the summer season, we might even say, fund the August part of your summer season, because this July thing does become kind of pressing. So particularly most organizations have something, and even some of our markets had winter markets. So it was like, fund your winter market, that's even easier to guarantee funding, but we'll do what we can within reason. Like I said, last year was a bummer in that case where an organization just got it in the week that things started. And then it was like, well, we're halfway through this project. So we were able to fund some of the project, which is good. But kind of was maybe a little bit more of a crunch than all of us, grantee included, could anticipate or handle for that year. So the buffer Maggie talked about is a nice one. But you can always call us if you're like, this is absolutely the only thing we're doing this year. And if we don't get this funding for this, then we're not using New Mexico Arts funding. We're going to try and figure it out. Maggie?
I just fielded another question in my email, and it is, are we going to have to spend all the money from the grant in one concert year? And I would say we don't really consider your concert years as a cycle. We consider our fiscal year this cycle. So I hope that answers the question, Bryce.
Yeah, I think, so as we mentioned way earlier, many slides ago at the beginning of the presentation, we talked about term dates, what we mean. So the term is based on the New Mexico Arts contract year, but even a little less definitive in that it starts, signature Deborah Garcia y Griego signs. That's the first day or effective date of the contract. And many of you, so really look at the agreement term date. Many of you will have May 31st, 2024 as the end date on your contract. So those are the bookends of which you're working towards. So whatever's happening in that time period that you think would be, use of New Mexico Arts funds during that period, don't put anything late 2024, don't put anything before, certainly before July of 2023. Again, think of those bookends and the activities. So are they the 5 things you put on that schedule that fall somewhere in that window of time?
We're getting a lot going on in the comments right here.
Okay.
Yeah, somebody asked, they had one address for one portion of their organization, and they had a different address for the other portion of their organizations, like where they want this to go to, and this other address where they want that to go to. And I just want to say, we only hold one address in the system for your organization, and that should match your W-9, it should match your PO, it should match everything that we go back and forth with. So of course it should match your invoices as well. Just one address, please.
Cool. So here's sort of some general contact information for us. If you call that main number, that is our lovely receptionist, Cynthia Gonzalez, who can sort of get you to your correct person. But actually, that being said, on this page, I tried to list who we all are, and we do list this on our website too. I know the team did a good job mentioning the grant categories that they work with, but here's just another listing of who you, so you may recognize us, you may already know, who you've been talking to, who's been sort of helping you through the grant process. But this is the listing by category that we take care of. And Cindy will try and refer you, as I mentioned, to the correct person. And of course, none of us are upset if maybe we're not your person, but you reach out to us. We're also going to help you as well. We might direct you back to your appropriate person, but we all kind of work together, the whole grants team. So anybody, or if someone's out of the office or things like that, the grants team are really great about offering assistance and support to you. So don't be shy. I think something we've talked about a lot, even with the application process, but it's also true for grant agreement process and follow-ups and final reports. We don't consider any question foolish or stupid. We're very, don't be shy. You don't have to preface an email. This may seem like a silly question. We really don't believe in that. We want to help you. And we're glad.
Can I ask a silly question?
Absolutely.
I can't remember now. It seems we used to have to send in 2 copies. Do we still have to do 2 original copies?
No.
Okay, thanks.
But good memory. And obviously we're good at following the instructions in previous funding years. So grateful for that as well. Right. Any other?
It just so happens that the treasurer of the board walked in and I was filling this out while you were doing your presentation. So I wanted to make sure. All right, thanks.
Awesome.
I'm going to disappear and help her with this.
Thank you so much. Okay. I see some more. Excellent. Thank you. Well, we really appreciate kind of spending time with us this morning. It is kind of, a lot of paperwork and details and information, but we're glad to share it with you. And of course, as you're driving in your car later and you're like, what do they mean by that thing? Again, this is where, you might have direct email contact with some of us, drop us a line, if a question comes up as you're kind of completing this. And I think the most important thing I'd like to stress is just thinking about the timing of your activities and giving us that buffer to get the signature by the secretary so we can ensure that we can fund those activities. Right. Well, awesome. Thank you so much. Are there any further? I think Maggie's done a good job checking the chat and various emails. As you can see, people are emailing her even directly as we're convening now. So, we try and keep on top of that. Excellent. Okay, go ahead, Maggie.
There is one answer here. Somebody asked, what is a concert year? Because apparently nobody's heard that term before. And the answer is a concert year for us means 2 semesters, like a school year, basically. So what you can do is you can just fund a few of them. It doesn't have to be the whole series. I hope that's clear. Well, here's another one. When is the earliest you recommend we turn this bad boy in each year? And if by bad boy, you mean the contract, ASAP. And let me see, anything else? Nope, nothing else.
Yeah, it's never too early.
Yeah,
You're too late if you've hit September 1st. And the reason we like to really stress September 1st, and we understand, particularly we fund some colleges and local governments, some organizations, it can take a while to get their authorizers, the appropriate person. We also understand, except for if you have a July event, ASAP absolutely applies. People are on vacations this time of year. You know, there are things that mean you don't return it next week or the week after you're notified of funding. Sooner helps. It means you get an earlier signature date by the secretary. But September 1st is kind of a significant cutoff because we also want to make sure that this funding can be used for grantees. So if you are not able to accept your funding award, we want to know that earlier in the process. Yes, Maggie.
I would also note, you know, a lot of people lose track of these deadlines. Put them in your calendar. Put your contract deadline in your calendar. Put your advance review, if you need to have one, date in your calendar. Put, you know, the final application date in your calendar so these don't slip off the side of your desk. It can be very difficult for the staff to herd cats, if you will, in terms of people missing their deadlines. So that would be really helpful to us. And we appreciate you giving the time and attention to these deadlines, as they are important because you signed a legally binding contract agreeing to hit these deadlines. Thank you. I'm glad everybody showed up.
A great turnout. Thank you. Yes, thank you for doing this on a Monday morning. And everybody was, you know, great humor and wonderful attention and questions. And hopefully enough caffeine to sort of get through it all. We really appreciate it.